This is the future.
Each Warframe in the game can play a different role, but sometimes, there are Warframes that gets overshadowed by others due to the fact that those other Warframe does the job better. But mind you, the broken Warframe is not to be trifled with, as with a good build and setup, this broken thing can break even the strongest in the game. This Warframe originated from the Void, hence it has the power of the Void, and in the game, Void damage is a true neutral damage now. This means that 50% resistance of Void damage on cloned flesh and fossilized enemies are removed now, and there's no stopping this damage type in wrecking almost everything in the game. Their passive ability reduces the damage sustained within an area by 25% and has a chance to block incoming weapon damage. Now, there's a specific setup wherein you can do 100% evasion with the broken Warframe, and that is equipping the Sly Volfapilla with the Slide Evolution mod, then activating Xaku's fourth ability, while having the complete set of Karnus mods in your arsenal. While this will get you locked into using heavy attack combo, it's easier done with the Helminth system, and having Ensnare in your build allows you to group and easily kill enemies with heavy attacks and gain 100% evasion at the same time. Their first ability is called Xata's Whisper, and when it's active, Xaku will deal a small amount of void damage on top of the base weapon damage. The void damage is dealt regardless of the mods equipped and is based on a percentage of the damage a weapon inflicts. Now, the broken Warframe is not the only one that can use this ability, as it's their subsumable ability. Although Xata's Whisper is not all about damage, and if you seek only damage, then Roar is probably the better choice in most cases. However, Xata's Whisper have more utility. Proc Void proc and enemies cannot shoot you back. If you are using headshots, it makes easier to do them after first shot. Void status is effective against sentients, except Yadelin and little guys around them, resetting their immunity. They can change the orb damage, not to mention that the damage instances that Xata's Whisper give to certain setup is really insane, just like Mesa with a galvanized setup. Also, a secondary benefit of the Void damage is the Void Shield that is created as a status effect. The small concentration of Void energy will block oncoming bullets and keep Xaku from sustaining damage for a short period. To make the most of the Void status effect and added damage, players will want to use a weapon with a high status chance. The Frame's second ability is definitely the most enjoyable of the four to use. Any enemies within the area will be disarmed and Xaku will wield them to inflict Void damage on foes. There is a limit on the number of weapons can be stolen, but Xaku can disarm 10 or more enemies at once. Each weapon will deal damage to the enemy it was taken from based on the level of the enemy. If players are below the weapon cap, the ability can be recast to disarm even more foes. Some enemies will be staggered by the attacks as well. It is extremely satisfying to watch a dozen enemies chase Xaku while getting shot by their own weapons. NPCs will only be able to use melee attacks while disarmed. This is the ability that somehow made some Warframe players super lazy gamers. All they need is to cast Gaze and let those guns do all the killing. Anyway, the ability can last for a lifetime if you are constantly keeping an eye of your fourth ability. Next is the ability called the Lost, which allows players to cast one of 3 different abilities, each of which is from a fallen frame used to construct Xaku. By tapping the ability button, players can cycle between each. Holding down the ability button will cast the ability that is selected. All 3 area of effect abilities can be used in one fight, which is an interesting aspect of the frame few players utilize. Xaku can turn enemies into allies by using the Accuse ability. Each enemy will have its own ability duration, which means a recast will not extend the timer. Like the Grasp of Lock, Accuse has an effect cap, which is reached after a dozen or so enemies are turned into allies. The ability will stun enemies for a second, after which they will begin to turn on their own kind. The Gaze ability will trap and bind a target in place, rendering it immobile for a short period. Damage inflicted on bound targets will not be inflicted until after the effects of the ability wear off, at which point the enemy will likely be dead. Just 2 targets can be bound at a time, and the first target that was trapped by the ability will be freed after a second recast. Of the 3 options, Gaze is probably the worst. Xaku's Deny ability shoots a beam of void energy that damages and stuns any target hit. Enemies that are struck by the beam will be damaged and suspended in the air for several seconds. Players can cast the ability again to immobilize more enemies. Players will be able to quickly dispense of any stunned enemies while they are frozen in place. The ability requires slightly more accuracy than AQ's, but it is still very useful when fighting multiple NPCs. The Frame's final ability was an incredible addition to Xaku, and it is a lot of fun to use. Once activated, Xaku will detonate, sending shrapnel from the Frame in all directions. Enemies close enough to Xaku will be damaged by the area of effect. After detonation, Xaku will transform into a lighter skeletal frame that can move faster than before. The frame will move 20% faster while the ability is active. The vast runtime also provides a buff to Xaku's passive. While in skeletal form, Xaku has a 75% chance to dodge attacks and a 75% damage reduction. Xaku feels almost unstoppable while sprinting around with a stripped-down frame. Any enemies that are in Xaku's line of sight will be inflicted with a small amount of void damage as well. It is extremely enjoyable to decimate waves of enemies with the vast runtime in Warframe. Xaku is a great choice in any type of mission because the frame technically has 6 different attacks to choose from. The most deadly combination is Accuse and Grasp of Lock, which is particularly useful in defensive games. Xaku can control a dozen NPCs and the remaining enemies are disarmed by the Grasp. Another effective combination is Gaze or Deny and Xata's Whisper. Using the synergy will disable high-level enemies and deal a large amount of void damage in addition to weapon damage. Xaku can be played in a number of ways, and any of the 3 attacks will be effective when combined with another ability. Many players do not know that the vast runtime will actually destroy all containers in a room when activated. Using the ability is a smart way to farm resources such as argon crystals. Players will need to have a decent amount of ability range for larger areas. However, anyone looking for air resources should use the vast runtime to speed up the process. Honestly, Xaku may be called broken Warframe as they are pieces of Warframes formed together, but this Warframe is actually not the one that is broken, but all those enemies that stands in the way of this Warframe. The Warframe has the tool to do it all. The only thing I don't like about this Warframe is sometimes you need to rely on evasion for survivability or the shield gating mechanic. But overall, if you master survivability in Warframe, Xaku is a Warframe that will be fun as hell to play with. Thank you so much for watching. Squad Leader signing off.